Welcome to Weathered Questions, where we answer the questions on your radar.
Welcome into another Weathered Questions episode here as we round out June and start July. The 4th is right around the corner. Hopefully have a chance to take in a baseball game and maybe have some time with the family here as we enjoy the birthday United States coming up here as we move our way into July. But this is Weathered Questions, the podcast where we answer the meteorology questions on your radar. I'm meteorologist Kaj O'Mara, joined by Jan Ryherd, and already, Jan, the summer's kind of getting away from us. A little bit, just a little bit.
It really is. It's flying by. Why does it always happen like this?
I like the way you led that intro right there because, today's episode, we've had some great questions on this. And it is a whole different world when we talk about weather in different parts of the world. But then what's really cool is when you get up in an airplane and you see it from there. And so that's going to be kind of the topic of some of our questions here on this episode.
I don't know about you, Kai, but I am a window seat for life kind of person.
Window seat and exit row. I'm there.
Yeah. I think most meteorologists are like that. Our poor spouses who are always forever stuck in the middle seat because we have to take the window seat. But
yep. Exit row. At least you got leg room. I'll pay the extra $19 or whatever it is.
That's true.
But the exit row, I'm all for that. I love that.
Okay. Quick sidebar. If you haven't gathered already, we're going to talk about aviation weather and some stuff up in the clouds today. But sidebar, I was recently on a flight and I did not pay the extra to pick my seat. So they just placed me. However, the seat that I got was literally the worst seat I've ever had. It was the back of the plane and it was a small, regional jet where the jet engines are like up in the back of the plane, not under the wings.
Yeah.
And so looking out my window, all I could see was this jet engine in my face. I had a window seat and I couldn't even see anything.
So in these situations, Jan, we oftentimes ask, what did you learn?
Pay for the seat.
Never do that again. When it offers you a selection of the seat, do it. When in doubt, just sneak it in the expense report. It's okay.
Well,
worst they can do is say no. Well then yeah, that's your fault. This is 100% on you.
Yes, all my fault.
It is. Yeah, okay. So
I take full blame for it, and I read my book, and everything was fine. Okay, so let's get into some questions today. This one comes in from Leo in Urbandale, and he asked, why is it turbulent when you fly through the clouds? What's going on?
Very good question. And as we go throughout this episode, realize that neither Jan nor myself are licensed pilots. Okay.
Correct.
But we do know how the atmosphere works. And we do
specialize
know why.
in weather on the ground.
Yes, we do know why some of these, and what we're going to call our really basic questions today.
Yes.
We're not getting into microbursts or all that kind of stuff. We're getting into the everyday type of stuff that if you've been on an airplane, you may have observed yourself. And that's what we're going to be answering the questions for today. So when you're flying through the clouds, that's a great question. So first off, we have to think about how clouds are formed. Well, the vast majority of them, let's just take cirrus clouds out for a second. Cirrus are those really high, thin, wispy ones. You're at cruising altitude when you go through those. And there's not a whole lot of bumping going on there because there's really not a whole lot of mass to those. But what about an average cumulus cloud? So that's the one that looks like a cotton ball floating in the sky. To get a cumulus cloud to form, it does need its own little updraft and its own little downdraft. And even though you can't see it with your eyes from the ground, or if you're a pilot, there is an up and down circulation going on in front of you. It's not enough to cause problems, but it is enough to potentially roughen your flight a little bit. And if you do fly through a cloud layer, stratus can be the same way, especially if you've got rain going on. So those would be nimbus clouds. If you're going through that, in order to generate those raindrops, you're generating at least some upward motion in the atmosphere, and it's going to hit the bottom of the plane, and it's going to bounce around a little bit. I will tell you that kind of turbulence is not, as far as I understand, harmful at all to any aircraft. It just kind of makes it a little bumpy. Nothing like going down the street and hitting some bumps in your own car. It's kind of the same story, except it's a different part of the atmosphere. There's just some circulations going on in front, and some of those air currents are hitting the plane, and that's where you're getting some of that from. So that's why it can get a little bit bumpy when you fly through clouds, or if you see a cloud out the window. Sometimes it's smooth, but other times, because of that little up and down going on, you might get a little bit of that in your seat when you're flying.
Yeah. I think that's a really I like your comparison to the car, because like you could see a car going down the street and it's just kind of cruising along, right?
Yep.
Whereas if you're in that car, you kind of feel every little kind of crack in the pavement and things. Um, if you watch a plane as it's coming in for a landing or taking off, and maybe the clouds are just kind of translucent enough that you can almost kind of see it through there. Like if you're watching, again, where you know that, oh yeah, there's probably going to be some bumps on the plane as they're going through those cloud layers or climbing and descending. But if you watch the plane, it's just cruising smooth, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, those bumps are so small. It's just that you're strapped into your seat, and so you feel every little bump all the more
Yeah.
when they're happening.
Well, and to expand on this just real briefly, I know the question has to do with flying through clouds. There's the lowest part of our atmosphere. We call that the planetary boundary layer. It's only about 1,000 or 2,000 feet thick most days. And if you've ever been sitting in an airplane and then you're taking off on the runway, right? And you go up and the pilot's got a nice pitch on it and you're getting up to altitude quickly. That first minute or two, there might be some bumps there. And then all of a sudden it smooths out. Why did that happen? The sun heats the ground heats the air above it. If there's heating, what's going on? The air is rising. Just like that air is rising around a cloud. That air is actually rising from the ground up. And there might be a couple of thermals that get hit. And so we call that the planetary boundary layer. And it's very typical for those lowest few thousand feet to have some bumps. Same thing when you're landing. You might feel a little bit of that too. Now, if you do it in the overnight, if you're doing the red-eye flight, the atmosphere is really stable at night and you might not feel it at all. But in the middle of the afternoon, if there's cumulus clouds above you and you're getting ready to go into a jet and go, I can promise you the first few minutes might have a few bumps in them. That's why. It's kind of how that all goes. So now let's say that you are in a flight and you didn't make the mistake that Jan made and sat next to a jet engine. You got a true window seat like a real meteorologist should. So now you're looking and you're like, okay, I was down in the concourse. I got my cup of coffee and I could see my cumulus clouds. And now I can see them from the top down out of the plane. So the question, Jan, is clouds look so different from an airplane looking down. Can you talk about why that might be?
Yeah, so there's a lot to digest there, right? We've talked about all different kinds of clouds, and so part of it is just you're looking at a different angle, right? You're looking from the top down. Maybe something that looked smooth from the ground, maybe you're seeing all the bumps on top now, and really what's going on there? Why clouds are smooth on the bottom? There is a layer, an invisible layer, but a layer called the lifting condensation level. We like to call it the LCL because every profession needs a bunch of acronyms.
That's right.
But the LCL is basically it's the floor of the clouds. It's where clouds start forming. It's the bottom, and so it's very smooth. All the cloud, no clouds can kind of form below that. So they kind of don't necessarily sink to that level, but that's where they start building at that level. And so then they can build upward from there. And depending on the type of cloud you have, maybe it builds really far upward, like a towering cumulus cloud, or maybe it's just a little puff if it's a little altocumulus or something like that. But you have bumps on your clouds. So when you were drawing pictures as a kid of your clouds and you made all those big round kind of bubbly shapes, hopefully you smoothed out the bottom because that's what the clouds actually look like. They have a smooth bottom and then they have the bumps all around the top. So that's part of what you're seeing that might be different is you're seeing all the bumps on the top, but not the flat on the bottom. The other side is just going to be the lighting, right? You're going to see a lot whiter clouds from the sky just because you've got a lot more sun lighting them and nothing blocking them necessarily. So Those are probably some of the biggest things. I think also just the fact that you can see so much further from an airplane window, and so you can see like an entire bank of clouds, an entire warm front mass that just goes on forever and ever of those kind of rows and rows and rows of clouds versus just the small little sector over your head at any one point. I think those are probably the biggest things that you would see.
Yeah, I agree. What's always fun to do is if you've got a day with these fair weather cumulus clouds around, at the ground, all we see is kind of intervals of clouds and sun. The cloud will go behind the sun. But if you actually see cumulus clouds from an airplane, a fun game to play is try and figure out which shadow is being cast by the cloud.
Oh, yeah.
If it's, around lunchtime and it's at a really high sun angle, those shadows might be, fairly directly under the cloud or close to it. If it's a later night or a later afternoon and you get longer shadows, those clouds are interesting. They can cast some pretty darn big shadows, and they're offset by a lot depending on the height of the cloud. So that's a fun game for kids to play if they're bored. Try and figure out which shadow is the cloud. So
I'm glad I'm not the only person who does that. Like I'll look down and be like, oh, that farm is completely in the in the shade. If I was at that farm right now looking up, like where is that cloud from me, right? Like
wow. And not necessarily if the cumulus cloud, now daytime heating is what forms those, but let's just say daytime heating wasn't a thing and the cumulus cloud was in exactly the same spot at 10 in the morning versus 4 in the afternoon, the shadow would go in the opposite direction. That makes it even cooler.
It does.
So there's a whole lot of fun stuff we can see from way up high. That's for sure. So with that, the one final thing could be that, and I think it's just so minor, it's barely worth mentioning, but we can. There isn't a whole lot of atmosphere, especially if you're way up at cruising altitude. So there's not quite as much scattering of light going on as you're looking down as there is from being an observer on the ground looking up. It shouldn't change your lighting much, but I'll tell you, it could really create a neat effect if you're close to sunrise or sunset. So that could be one more thing worth looking at if you're on an airplane about those times.
Absolutely. All right. So we're going to move on. Let's see. We're about halfway through the show. So let's get to trivia today. Today's question is, what is the name given to the river of air that moves air masses around the globe? No answer options on this one. I do promise you know this answer.
Think about today's topic.
Yeah. just think about it for a little bit. We'll be back in a few seconds. Alrighty, we kind of left you hanging on this one. What is the name given to the river of air that moves air masses around the globe? Made it tricky. No answer options, but the hint that Kai gave, what are we talking about today? Think about it. What do you think the answer is? All right, reveal it, Kai.
I go from the concourse to my seat in what? A jet! So we're talking about the jet stream. Boom.
Yep.
Way up high.
Jet stream.
There you go.
It's basically the kind of again, it's the river of air, right? It's all the air that kind of moves our air masses around and moves weather around, and depending on where it sets itself up over the country, over parts of the world, because it does go all the way around, right?
Sure does.
That is part of what influences where weather is happening and why things are moving around. But it's also really great at helping planes fly easier because it's really fast moving air, and so jets will take advantage of it, fly up at that cruising altitude that we all know about, where they can just kind of fit right in, just like if you were getting into a lazy river at a water park. You've got the little side thing where you get in your tube, and then once you get into that flow of the river, you just kind of go. And so that's basically what's happening. The jets are just kind of getting into the jet stream, and they have to use a lot less fuel that way, and airlines like that.
Absolutely. If you can jump in an airplane in Dallas and go all the way up to Minneapolis and you've got a south to north jet going on, that's a great ride right there. That's going to push you all the way home for sure. The one thing you can't do, so we just talked about jet stream being just kind of that river of fast moving air. It does tend to separate various air masses. And when that happens, if the jet stream's really going quickly, that probably means there's a pretty decent contrast in air masses. It doesn't make the jet stream hazardous, but there could be hazardous weather around it. So we're going to get into this, Jan. So here's a basic question that was asked. Why can't airplanes fly through storms?
Great question. I think a lot of people are immediately going to be like, well, it's the lightning. And obviously, lightning can cause some problems, and you don't really want to put a whole plane of people near that. Just like your car, lightning is generally going to kind of go around the body of the airplane and not really cause problems. I'm sure it would cause some trouble to electronics and stuff. So again, probably not something we want to mess with. But what it really comes down to is one of the things we started the episode off with. Storms have a lot of motion going on. There's updrafts, there's downdrafts, and very powerful ones. And planes don't want to deal with that. Planes like smooth flying. Airplane pilots don't want to have to be constantly, going up and down to make sure that you're not nosediving. So I think the biggest thing is kind of avoiding, for lack of a better word, turbulence, but not getting into those updrafts and downdrafts and putting the entire flight at risk because of all of that, those fluctuations, those very quick fluctuations. Depending on temperature, time of year, and stuff like that, you may also be dealing with hail. You may be dealing with potential for de-icing concerns and stuff like that because of all the moisture within a storm. And even at the hottest days of the year, when you're that high up in the clouds, when you have moisture, you're going to be dealing with frozen moisture, snow or ice, and that's also going to cause some problems too. So a couple different reasons, I think, but I think the biggest one really ultimately comes down to flying safely is really hard to do when you have all of that turbulence going on.
Yeah, and you think about where things are at cruising altitude. There's a couple of different hail detection techniques that I'll use in my day-to-day job, and one is just how much the air is diverging at the top of the storm. And sometimes that air is coming apart at 100 knots, 130 knots. And so if the air is coming apart like that up top, that updraft is over 100 miles an hour. And so that's not a cumulus cloud style of bump. The updraft of a cumulus cloud is minuscule compared to enough to loft hailstones and support them. And you've got damage to the aircraft. You've got a sudden downdraft could ground the plane. I mean, they avoid it. And not to mention, at the very top like that, you do want to give yourself buffers around those storms because, at the very top of those strong updrafts, you don't want to get hit by hail. That's not something you want. So it's pretty violent inside those storms, and you don't want to mess with that. Passengers don't want it. All you have to do, guys, is just look at any hurricane hunter video. Those hurricane hunters, by the way, are made to go through that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And the inside of a severe thunderstorm, could potentially be more violent than a category 1 or 2 hurricane. When you look at the different various wind speeds going on in there. And so
especially that high up, yeah.
Those pilots get jostled around all the time. And you can imagine that's a plane that's made to do that. That's not a 200 passenger jet. I'm sure it would pass the stress test, but that's not something you want to do to it.
The airplane itself would pass the stress test. The passengers might may be stressed.
Right. But then there's also a ripple effect to all this too, because, and I don't know why this is the case, but for some strange reason, because we see it with transportation as well, I don't know why people speed when it's foggy. I don't get it.
Yeah,
I see it all the time. And
that's not the sentence I thought was going to follow.
I know. I got you all circled up. So if you can only see 1,000 feet, how some of you do 80 on the interstate, that's just mind boggling. But that's why also you're not going to see planes take off and land in any sort of inclement weather.
Yeah.
They'll shut down the airport. If there's a storm overhead, they'll shut it down and they'll just do laps around it until they can land. And then guess what? If that's your connecting flight, now you're behind. And it could be a ripple effect the whole day. You know, if there's a storm in Miami and that's where your plane's coming from and you're leaving Dallas and there isn't a cloud for 500 miles around you and you can't handle it and your kid's having a meltdown and you're all stressed out and it's like, sorry, welcome to travel. That's what it is.
And part of that too, that sometimes people don't think about is you might get something called a ground stop where it's, again, the lightning of the plane in the sky, not necessarily a problem, but you can't have your ground workers, right? The people who are putting bags onto the plane or who are running the jet bridges and stuff, they can't be outside when there's lightning. So that's another reason that you might have weather delays and such, not necessarily specific to the plane in the air, but just airport operations.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to land a plane in that. No way.
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to land a plane.
No, not a chance.
I am fascinated by weather, fascinated by aviation, but I know that aviation is not my forte and not my
same.
Fifth career.
Right. We know the basics about how the weather can affect it, but there's so much more. And if professional pilots are listening, they're probably like, oh my gosh, they should mention this. I know we don't know what we don't know. So please email us.
If you're listening, let us know. And we would love to interview you.
We'll have you on the program. Yeah, we'll have you right here on the program. Talk about it even more.
Well, in closing here, because we've got a few minutes left, I want to throw out a little bit about how commercial airlines actually help with weather data. You want to dive into that a little bit, Kai? Because I think this is so cool and something that a lot of people probably don't realize.
Yeah. So we have the Upper Air Data Network from NOAA's National Weather Service when they launched the weather balloons at various times in various offices in the entire country. But I'll also tell you that in these really big airport hubs, there's a system out there called AMDAR, and it's the Aircraft Meteorological Data Relay. And what it does is it can actually capture some atmospheric data right there from the commercial aircraft. So, for example, if we had a situation where we needed to know the upper air data around Chicago, a lot of people don't realize the National Weather Service in Chicago is not tasked with launching an upper air balloon. That's right. That city of that size doesn't have a weather balloon. They never have. That's just the way it's all shaped up. So Davenport will launch one. Green Bay will launch one. And Lincoln, Illinois will launch one, but Chicago itself will not. And you think to yourself, I would love, for whatever reason, to know the freezing level today. Well, there are different sites and different places you can go to look up some of that airplane data and figure it out. And when I have reconstructed weather for thunderstorm events, particularly around Chicago, both Midway Airport and O'Hare International both have, I've seen it off their aircraft before. And you can get it. I got a storm once that was within an hour. I got the upper air data within an hour of a storm occurring. So that's huge. That's good stuff. And, you don't see it at small municipalities, but like Minneapolis, you'll see it. New York, you'll see it. Dallas, Fort Worth, you'll see it.
Those big hubs.
Yeah, bigger airports, absolutely. And it's very cool. It's just like a weather balloon. Now, some flights, some data cuts off at 10,000 feet. Mm-hmm. Maybe some data will cut off at 20,000 feet, but it's better than having nothing. And on days with strong winds or on days that if you're dry all morning long and you're a meteorologist in Chicago and you just have to know what that upper air is looking like because are we getting more unstable through the day? Are we still having a cap in place? Try and go pick out an airplane sounding and see what you can find. And that can play a huge role in the forecasting process. So in a lot of ways, aviation can help us a ton, not just reconstruct the weather, but also kind of help us to forecast it in those gaps where weather balloons are not launched.
Yeah, and I think
Very cool.
those are the days where it's so important, right? Those big severe weather days, winter weather days, whatever kind of weather, those bigger event days where you need more consistent data, that you really do see the difference. And the nice thing about airplanes is they go up and down all the time, and
Yep.
they're perfectly fine. Whereas a weather balloon, when it goes up into the atmosphere,
It's gone.
what happens is it basically expands and expands and expands until it pops, and then the instruments, drift back down to a farm field somewhere, and hopefully somebody, can retrieve them. But the actual balloon itself, we have to, repurchase and get a new one of those, and we have to get more helium and stuff. So having it on airplanes is great because we can keep redoing that multiple times a day
Yeah.
for very little cost.
What was really fun too is when you see a storm coming in and either you're doing a reconstruction or a forecast, and you're like, dang guys, that's like 45 minutes from the airport. You're still going. Yep.
Yeah.
We're going to Denver, dude. Don't care. And they get out of there and they follow their flight plan and they get out just in the nick of time. So I'm sure it's a big business where, planes are coming and going every couple minutes these days. So they time it out real nice.
An interesting thing, planes are coming and going all the time, but remember a couple years ago when kind of air traffic just stopped amid the COVID pandemic? We actually ended up seeing weather models and weather forecasting as a result of it kind of take a step back for a little bit because we weren't getting data in as well, or as much data as we had been used to.
Yeah.
And so that absolutely does play a role in having all of that information and the resources for weather forecasting is very important to having those good forecasts. So yeah, just kind of a little nuance thing that some people may not realize.
It was the first time, I believe, in 15 years that our skill went backwards for a year. And it was actually measurable. Like we were on average a degree worse everywhere. Like it was notable. That's for certain.
It was, wild. And we're glad to be back from that and then continuing to get better again. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. And yet again, we have filled another 27 minutes of your time. So thank you for spending your time with us here. If you have questions or comments, please let us know. We love to hear from you. We want to answer the questions on your radar. Send them in. You can type them out. You can give us your name. You don't have to give us your name. You can send in an audio clip. There's lots of ways that you engage with us. Write a review. Tell your friends and family as you are headed out for the 4th of July. We hope everybody has a fun and safe holiday. We're going to take a holiday ourselves and take next week off. But we will see you back here in mid-July for yet another episode of Weathered Questions, where we will answer all those questions that come in over that time. So we hope to get those. And in the meantime, stay safe.